Welcome to Biology of Marine Mammals. I'm Dr. Leslie Williams, and today's lecture covers the concepts of evolution and natural selection. In the first part, what we'll do is we'll talk about the observations of Charles Darwin that made him famous. From there, we'll talk about his famous theory, the theory of evolution by way of natural selection. After going through a couple of examples of natural selection, we can move on to the concept of fitness and how the environment plays a critical role in determining fitness. Charles Darwin is often known as being the godfather of evolution. This isn't exactly true. In fact, Charles Darwin was not the first person to propose the concept known as evolution. Evolution is defined as genetic change along the line of descent. In layman's terms, this simply means that as you move from generation to generation to generation, the population changes genetically, even a little bit. That is evolution. We know evolution is a fact. We see evolution every day. In fact, recently in the headlines, new superbug E. coli evolves, causing sickness in hundreds of people. These are genetically new versions of E. coli. So evolution occurs all the time. What Charles Darwin actually was famous for, and correctly so, was devising a way that evolution might happen. This is known as natural selection. Charles Darwin was famous because he was a bit lucky, extremely observant, and quite intelligent in his ability to put together a bunch of observations into a mechanism. So let's take a look at what his observations really were and how they allowed him to reason out the concept of natural selection. Okay. Charles Darwin was lucky in that he was able to participate in a 5-year voyage around the world on the HMS Beagle in the 1800s. As he went from land to land, encountered many new species, he was able to make detailed observations of those species and the populations within. One of his famous observations was that in every population, the individuals show variation. We know this to be true for humans. Look around you, you'll see that no human looks like you, and that is because each human has a unique genetic makeup from a different combination of alleles. His second observation was that all populations must have the ability to increase in numbers for each generation, but clearly not all individuals are reproducing. So of course, for humans, we know that our population is growing with every generation, but of course, everyone knows some adult humans who have not been reproductive. So not every adult is having multiple children. So from this, he was actually able to make some very key inferences. The first was that clearly not all individuals are reproductive. This could be one of a couple reasons. Either they don't make it to reproductive age, so they die before that, or even if they do make it to reproductive age, they don't necessarily successfully reproduce. In this picture here, we see two female northern elephant seals, one with a child or an offspring and one without. So one is reproductive and one clearly isn't. So from this, he made this leap. He said, I think that there is competition among individuals for resources. And when we say resources, we could think access to food, access to habitat or space, or even being selected as a good mate. So there's competition for resources, and because there are differences in a population, probably not everybody has the same competitive advantage or same competitive edge. So if we go back to humans and think of an extreme here, I have a 3-year-old son, and if I put an apple in front of my 3-year-old son and a 20-year-old male, and they're both starving, the 20-year-old male is going to be stronger and a little bit more intelligent and have better motor skills and is going to snatch that apple before my 3-year-old can get to it. Clearly, the 20-year-old male is going to have a competitive edge and be more competitive for that resource. So when resources are limited, individuals must compete. So from that, he made this assertion. It stands to reason that if individuals compete, those that are best adapted for their environment are going to have the competitive edge for resources. Those who have better access to resources are going to be able to reproduce more. And therefore, their alleles or genes will be more plentiful or abundant in the next generation. This is a concept known as differential reproduction. That is, not everybody in a population has the same reproductive success. Some individuals have more reproductive success than others, and those that are more reproductively successful probably are so because of their genetic makeup. From this, he formulated the theory of natural selection as a mechanism by which evolution occurs. The actual definition is as follows. Individuals with heritable traits that are best adapted for their environment are more likely to survive and therefore reproduce. And therefore, these traits will increase in subsequent generations. That's a pretty long definition. Let's take a look at what it really means. What it really means is that nature selects which genes or alleles are going to be best for the environment. And those are the alleles that are going to come up more frequently in subsequent generations. We can do what's called artificial selection to demonstrate this concept. Dog breeding is a great example of that. We have lots and lots of dog breeds out there that are the result of artificial selection. For example, a Labradoodle, which is a combination between a Labrador and a Poodle. Humans have decided they would like the temperament of a Labrador with the allergenic properties of poodle hair. So they have taken a Labrador and a Poodle and mixed them together, artificially selecting both of those traits to create the Labradoodle. So these are things that we've been able to manipulate somewhat to create a bunch of new dog breeds. Natural selection is the same idea, except it's nature selecting those genes or alleles as best adapted. All right, we're going to take a look at the first published example of natural selection, which came up in the 1800s with peppered moths. So these moths are found in Europe, and the standard phenotype or look to the peppered moth is indeed speckled, as shown in the upper corner. And in the early 1800s, somebody actually identified a new mutant, which was shown coming up as all dark. I tried to figure out, well, how are these two different phenotypes faring in nature? So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to move and take a look at a game that we can play using a website. I'm going to play the game for you, but I've left the link down at the bottom of this screen so that you have the ability to type it in on your own computer and play the game yourself. All right, so what we have here is a tale of two moths. We have light moths and we have dark moths. Which one will nature select to be the winner? Well, the one that is best camouflaged for its environment. So let's go ahead and play. What we're going to do is we're going to imagine that we have a light colored forest and the tree trunks that the moths sit on are going to be light colored. I'm of course the bird, and I'm going to go around and try to eat as many of these moths as I can. And as you can see here, the dark ones stand out quite markedly and are much easier to eat. If you see the screen, you'll notice that the dark moth population changes as I start consuming moths before they have a chance to reproduce. The light moths, which are much better camouflaged, have the ability to hide a little bit, make it more difficult for me to see as the bird, and therefore are more likely to reproduce. So as we go through this, we see that, again, the percentage or the frequency of these alleles changes with time. All right, I didn't do the second example, but you're welcome to on your own. If you had changed the environment to a dark background, in other words, the trees were covered with soot, you would actually be able to see that the dark moths then would have more reproductive success because they blend in with that dark environment, while the light ones stand out quite markedly and are easy for the birds to pick off. So which moth phenotype, light or dark, had the higher fitness? The first thing we've got to do is take a look at what do I mean by fitness. I don't mean this, although lots of people think that when they first see that term. Fitness, from an evolutionary standpoint, is a measure of how well adapted a particular trait or individual is to the current environment. Essentially, fitness is measured in how frequently that individual is going to reproduce. In other words, their reproductive success. So which moth had the higher fitness? In the example that I did, it was the light moth because they were camouflaged. But if we changed the environment, it would have been the dark moth. So in this case, fitness is totally dependent on which environment we put those moths in. Let's take a look at another example, one that we see in humans. Sickle cell anemia is caused by a mutant allele, and we'll call that allele little a, that causes the normally round red blood cells to actually flatten into a sickle shape. Individuals that possess both little a's have what is known as sickle cell anemia. This is actually fatal, and most individuals who have sickle cell anemia die before they reach reproductive age. When you take a look at the world, most individuals have what are called big A, and we would say that all of their red blood cells are round or normal. They have no health problems related to their red blood cell shape. But there are some individuals that have one of each copy. They have a big A and a little a. And as a result, a few of their cells will sickle at any given time. So you might say, well, who has the highest fitness? And we would say, clearly, the individual with the fewest number of health problems is the one that's most likely to reproduce successfully. So we would say big A, as we would in the United States. But if we change the environment, we change the fitness. In certain parts of the world, malaria is rampant. Those individuals that possess one copy of big A and one copy of little a, such that a few of their cells sickle, actually are resistant to malaria. So in those environments, the individuals that survive malaria very easily, even though they have a few health problems, are the ones that are most likely to reproduce successfully. And so in that environment, we would say they have the highest fitness. So to summarize, let's take a look at our key points of natural selection and fitness that we covered today. The first one is that natural selection is only going to apply if the traits are heritable. In other words, if the trait that you see has a genetic basis to it. You might look at me and you say, well, her hair is bluish green. That's my trait. But because I don't genetically code for it, natural selection would not apply to my hair color. The second is that the highest fitness is going to be defined as the highest reproductive success into the next generation. If I were to have 5 babies, but they were to all die before they reach reproductive success, my reproductive success would essentially be 0 because each one of my offspring did not make it to the next generation. Contrast that with somebody who had 2 babies, but both of those babies grew up and had babies of their own. You would say that person had a higher fitness than me in that scenario. So we're really looking beyond the next generation. It's not just how many offspring you produce, but how many actually make it farther on than that. Of course, a key of key importance is going to be that the environment absolutely matters. You change the environment, you're going to change the way nature selects what's favorable. And that was best exemplified with the moths, changed the environment from light to dark, and fitness completely swaps. And finally, fitness is not perfect. It's not looking for one allele or one gene that's got a perfect adaptation. Fitness is going to be a sum of both positive and negative aspects of that trait. So for example, in the red blood cell situation, those individuals that had some cells sickle were going to have some health problems. That's a negative. But in a malaria-ravaged area, they had the highest reproductive success. So they had the highest fitness despite the fact that there were still negative aspects to their genotype. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next section.